As a UK comic book collector, I find myself in a very unique position when it comes to comic books of a certain age. You see, things were very different on this side of the pond back in the early years of Marvel, and certainly carried on that way for many years thereafter. Now, as you guys know, the majority of superhero comic books were actually being published in the US, and so many exports had a long journey ahead of them in order to make it across to the European shores. This meant that in order to ensure their safe arrival to UK stores on time, many of these books would have likely been the first off the printing press, being packaged and shipped as quickly as possible, potentially making these the true first prints. But how do we know this for sure? Well, the truth is, we don't. But over the years of collecting, I, along with many other collectors, have noticed that a lot, not all, of these Pence copies of Marvel comic books imported here in the UK have much brighter colours to them. They appear to be a lot richer, have deeper blacks and sharper lines, implying that this was at the beginning of a particular printing run on the press, where the machine's inks would have been refilled or topped up. Later issues from the printing process, those that likely remained in the US due to not needing additional shipping time, are often discovered to be lighter in colour tone. This indicates that the inks were, at the time at least, running low on the machines. So what are the differences between a US cent print and a UK pence? Honestly, almost nothing. The only difference between these two books is the price plate used. But that's just the early American import comics. As the years, even decades went on, here in the UK we also had our own publications printed of these amazing stories. Honestly guys, I genuinely believe that here in the UK we had the most options for reading superhero comics than any other country worldwide. Using Spider-Man as an example, because that's what I remember most fondly from my childhood, we have weeklies and completes. Leading into the early 70s, the UK began reprinting some of the more classic Marvel Spider-Man tales in a much larger newspaper format. Due to the low quality of the paper and inks used at this time, many of these books are rather scarce these days, with many being thrown out shortly after use or being used as packaging material for parcels. Moving on to the 80s, the UK went back to a more standard US comic book size and style, combining Spider-Man stories into one book. You see, at this time in the US, Spider-Man had really found his audience and had multiple titles running at the same time. In fact, there were 4 Spider-Man titles per month at one point. Those 4 were compiled into one book here in the UK titled The Complete Amazing Spider-Man. I myself have fond memories of this particular UK release as they were released 1 to 2 months after the initial US. This series consisted of stories for each of the 4 main titles at the time, including Spider-Man by Todd McFarlane, now a classic run, Spectacular Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, and of course The Amazing Spider-Man. This then brought us into the 90s, and now a classic period of Spider-Man. This time period gave us story arcs such as the Clone Saga, and also introduced us to characters such as Ben Reilly and Kane. And so, along with these stories came a new UK printed comic book series titled The Astonishing Spider-Man by Panini. But alas, not all UK Pence books are created equal, despite the fact that I personally believe that they should be worth a lot more. So when compared, should the UK Pence comic books be worth more than the US counterparts? No, of course not. The weeklies, the completes, the astonishing books are all reprints and should be treated as such. But those original exported books from the US back in those early days should, in my opinion, most certainly be cherished. These Pence books have a lower print run than their US counterparts, and they have survived shipping across the seas. They have survived the passage of time, much like their US brethren. They have deeper, more vibrant colours, and are quite literally the definition of hot off the press. Honestly guys, if you prefer newsstand copies to direct simply because they've been out in the elements and having a higher grade is a rarer thing, then why not go for the ones that have travelled across the pond? Why not go for the ones that have made that long journey across the sea? Over the years, we collectors have seen many Canadian price variant books demand a much higher price than their more common American counterparts. And so with that in mind, is it not time that the UK Pence variant had its time on top? Thank you for watching.